Hey, this is four-time Black Belt World Champion Dominica Obelanite. If you guys are looking to level up your jiu-jitsu game with awesome jiu-jitsu courses on mindset, strategy, and beyond, make sure that you guys check out BJJ Mental Models Premium. I myself have a course up there, so make sure you guys check it out. Let's get you guys on that next step in your jiu-jitsu journey.
Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 224. I'm Steve Kwan.
And I'm Matt Kwan.
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And today, at long last, we were able to move heaven and earth and actually get both of our dumbasses on the same call at the same time. I don't think people understand exactly how difficult this actually is. But good to see you, Matt. How's it going?
Good to hear from you, Steve. Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I mean, I know that in the real world, I saw you like 2 days ago, but of course, in the internet podcast world, unfortunately, our schedules don't align very well. How are things going, man? I've been dropping in at your gym. You got a bunch of killers. Hey, I'm really sorry I tapped out your purple belt with the stack pass, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sure you just come in and wreck everyone, eh?
God. Matt's got this black belt guy. I've known him for quite a while, but man, he is an absolute monster. You got some killers there at your gym, buddy.
Yeah, every day I go in there is, it's a blessing and a curse. And when you see certain people walk through that door, you're just like, oh, God damn it, here we go again. But I'm grateful for it. Wouldn't have it any other way, and makes me better. So I've kind of embraced the suck and getting used to losing.
Yep, as they say, invest in loss and all of that. Well, hey, you had a topic you wanted to chat about. You wanted to talk about waypoints, J-points, the modern passing game, positional camping. But hey, this is your topic, so why don't you go ahead and give an intro? Just tell everyone what we're going to discuss today.
Well, I don't know what waypoints are. What is that?
I mean, it's a very similar thing. So waypoints are an idea that have been around for a long time. And I think that what you're talking about and what Danaher is talking about when we go into J-points are probably like an evolution of that. A waypoint is basically a pit stop position, right? It's a good position that you want to get to. You want to kind of center and move your game towards that. Comes up a lot in pressure passing. So for example, kind of like when you get sort of halfway through a pass and you stick your opponent in a shitty situation and you just kind of drain their energy, that you could call that a waypoint because it's kind of like a place that you're trying to get to where you can then branch your game out. Headquarters would often also be considered a waypoint because people try to get there before they kind of initiate a lot of their passing games sometimes. So it's just sort of like a comfort zone, a place you go to because there's a lot of good options for you and a lot of bad options for the other person. Again, I've heard a lot of people talk about this. I think the idea first came to my mind when I heard Braulio Estima talk about it. And I think if I recall correctly, he called it waypoints. But Fabio Gurgel's talked about it too as pit stops. And that concept has evolved a little bit to be more offensive, which I think is what you wanted to talk about today, if I understand correctly.
I mean, you just basically summed it up beautifully. I've never heard the term waypoints, but yeah, like checkpoints, pit stops. I can remember I was at a Cobrinha seminar probably close to like 10 years ago now. And he was very big on the idea of getting to these pit stop positions. So it's not really anything new in the jiu-jitsu world, but we are seeing this a lot right now, especially in the no-gi situations. So if you saw Who's Number One a couple weeks ago, a lot of people were using this style of passing. It's like I said, it's been around for a long time, but more specifically, recently it's been made very, very popular by Gordon Ryan, just using essentially half guard style passing to get to these so-called checkpoints. You had mentioned J-point. For those who don't know, J-point is, I think it's kind of a silly name, but it's the essentially getting past your partner's hip line, not necessarily securing the pass yet, but just the idea of the hip line being the jeopardy point where the guard player needs to recover in order to retain the guard. So if you pass the hip line at this point, they have no other choice but to react. So Danaher and Gordon are always talking about, getting to the J point. And then what we basically we're going to discuss a lot today was this idea of camping. So the idea of camping is something that Gordon has spoken about in his new instructional for guard passing. And it's basically a checkpoint. What I like is he goes on to elaborate about how these checkpoints are positions to somewhat fall back on when your guard pass isn't successful, or it's just a position you can hang out in for long periods of time. And basically, if let's say I was passing through the half guard and I had inside control on my partner's upper body, I had control of the head and shoulders, and I'm ready to complete the pass by clearing my leg. If I go for the pass sometimes and I rush the pass, often I can lose control and my partner will recover back to, let's say, a full guard. And this would be considered the wrong thing to do. This would allow my partner to reset back to a full guard. Whereas with this philosophy of camping, the idea with these checkpoints is you can kind of backtrack into a series of positions that allow you to, your partner kind of wins these small victories as you're trying to pass, but they're not really victories because you are backtracking into dominant positions. So let's say I was passing through the half guard and you recovered, and then I don't let you recover to a full guard. I only, you're framing on my face, I lose control of your head and shoulders. Instead of letting you recover fully, I just basically sink back down to the hips and kill the hips. So now I'm still passing from a half guard where your hips are flat and I've beaten your knee shield, as opposed to trying to rush through a pass and, essentially getting too greedy and trying to go for my pass, and then my partner, it fails, and then my partner recovers their knee shield. So to be able to backtrack into these positions, specifically a lot through the half guard, is kind of what we're seeing a lot in jiu-jitsu now. And it's the Gordon Ryan method of passing.
Which is really funny when you think about it, because this is a pretty significant change from when you and I came up in jiu-jitsu. I remember being told that the pass is the holy grail, right? I mean, 3 points, that's a lot of points. You do everything you can to try to secure that pass. And if you get 50% of the way through the pass, you finish that pass. But yeah, there has been this backtracking of that logic in the last few years, where the common wisdom now is, rather than rushing to complete the pass, you take your time and you stop in those positions where you've got a lot of options to move forward and backward, depending on what your opponent does. And I mean, it definitely works. Like you said, when you and I were watching Who's Number One a few days ago, I was very surprised to see the change in style. I mean, this is predominantly no-gi, so I'm thinking you're going to see a lot of upside down, spinning, leg lock, Barham bullshit going on, right? But what we actually saw was very traditional, slow, crushing pressure, not a lot of motion. And so it's interesting to see such a shift in the way of thinking in terms of how we should pass and when we should pass.
And that's the thing too, is jiu-jitsu moves in cycles. So, when I first started jiu-jitsu like 10, 15 years ago, Rafa Mendes and Cobrinha, these guys were like at the top, and the flavor of the month was like the Berimbolo was just becoming super popular. So instead of really focusing on pressure passing, you would see a ton of Berimbolos, and you would see pressure passing at the higher levels. Like you would see a lot of over-under passes from like Bernardo Faria and things like that, but you would see a lot more upside down game, a lot more dynamic game. That we can talk about gi versus no gi in terms of this style in a second, but you do still see lots of dynamic passing in the gi because of the grips. However, I do believe, I'm trying to think of ways that we can camp in these positions, and there are positions you can camp in the gi because of the grips. It makes it very, very effective. But if you watch like a guy like Tynan Dalpra from Art of Jiu-Jitsu, who's like, arguably the most effective and dynamic guard passer there is right now in gi jiu-jitsu. I mean, this guy's very, very dynamic, beautiful long step passes. He's become famous for this gator roll position that I've seen Rafa Mendes teach a couple years back, but now I think we're going to see a lot more of it, especially when you're in the smash pass position, which I consider a camping position in the gi. But I think really the camping style is not necessarily new techniques. I mean, if you said that to Gordon, he'd laugh at you because he's like, nobody's doing this shit I'm doing, right? Which is true to some degree. But a lot of the stuff he's doing is just really detailed, effective, simple half guard passing. That's kind of become his style now, where he kind of just wears you down. Now, obviously, his methods and his techniques are new, and he's systemizing them in ways that haven't really been documented before. But where I find the real difference is in the mindset of the guard passer. So, like you had mentioned, in jiu-jitsu, when I was first studying jiu-jitsu, I was taught like, yeah, we got to get our guard pass. We got to get our points. So I find that mindset kind of puts an emphasis on the end result, which would be passing to side control or north-south. And what this can do sometimes is put, I think, unnecessary pressure on the guard passer to complete the sequence. And the result of that is often you will lose control of your partner as you struggle to complete the pass. The guard passer exerts a lot of energy, and then in the end, if the pass doesn't work, you end up in a completely neutral position, and now the guard player has the ability to go back into the offensive cycle. So this can be considered potentially a loss for the guard passer, having used lots of energy for very little result. Now, what Gordon's doing, and again, people have been doing this for a long time, so I'm not saying Gordon invented it, but he is using it better than anyone right now. And that's, he's getting to these positions of dominance where, essentially half guard passing in a nutshell, you got to split your partner's legs, and then you get control of the head and shoulders. Danaher and Gordon call that the cranial shift, where you shift from, controlling the hips to controlling the head. And then from there, once you have, like, let's say a crossface and underhook or near side underhook or double unders or whatever kind of control you have, then your goal shifts to clearing your leg last. So by the time you clear your leg, you have tremendous control over your head, your partner's head and shoulders. So that's like half guard passing philosophy in a nutshell, as opposed to passing someone's leg with a toreando and then making a cranial shift. And now quite often what'll happen is they'll frame and then they get their knees back inside and you get nothing. So the half guard passing, especially for no-gi, where there's no gi and pant grips, becomes very, very effective. And so what Gordon's done is he has developed this system, whether it be through a half guard pass or even a body lock pass, which often leads through the half guard pass, and then getting into that cranial shift position. Now you have control of the head and shoulders. And like a lot of the time, if he gets off balanced here, which very rarely happens, the guy is one of the best pinners of all time, if not the best. And he knows that if his partner recovers, let's say like a half guard, that they're going to be using a ton of energy to get to that position. So they're going to be exhausted by the time they even recover. Let's say they get their elbows back inside. And he's fine with losing that battle because he's not rushing to the completion of the sequence. He actually talks a lot in his instructional about backtracking back into the half guard, giving his opponent the half guard, and then kind of restarting from there. So he's already decided through this camping style that he's restarting through an inferior position for his opponent, which is, if you've ever been on the receiving end of this, it's extremely exhausting and frustrating because you work so hard just to get let's say your elbows back inside, and then you want to continue to work to get your knees back inside so you can get back to a guard that you can actually play from, and then your opponent has already cut you off and killed your hips, and then they're climbing up your body again, right? And another grip that I'll mention, probably my favorite method, if possible, is the body lock, because the body lock prevents your partner from shrimping away. With a closed locked wedge around your partner's hips, they really don't have the ability to make space, and it's so easy to pass the half guard to side control and to mount with this body lock position. So I feel like body locks and half guard passing kind of goes hand in hand. But long story short, when you play this type of style, you kind of eliminate the ability for your partner to fully reset and get back to a neutral cycle. You're just backtracking into an inferior position for them, whether it's a half guard or a so-called pseudo half guard. And then from there, you just continue your passing. So it's a very, very effective way to get to these dominant positions. And also, you are generally not using a ton of energy while your partner is exerting tons of energy. And then Gordon says, when he allows his partner to recover to these checkpoint positions, essentially that's the time that he increases the tempo, which is a very effective way to manage your energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things I love about this revelation here is that it actually plays really well into strategies for older people, for hobbyists. I mean, the thing about like blitz passing and speed passing is that it is very, very hard to do, as you get older, especially. It also, I find, the more dynamic the game gets, the more stuff you need to know and keep in your head, because there's more weird things that can happen if things are moving quickly. But there's kind of a regression to a more slow, pressure-paced game I mean, it's great news to me because it's easier to learn, it's easier to play, and it's super effective, which I think is a surprise. This is one of those things where conventional wisdom gets challenged a bit, I think. You know, it had always used to be said that, well, you know, against good athletes who are really elite, they're just simply not going to get tired, they're not going to slow down. But man, like that is not what you see when you watch some of this competition. Again, going back to that latest Who's Number One card, man, you can really crush people with pressure. And even elite athletes will crumble at some point if you put enough pressure on top of them. So this idea of kind of camping out and basically whittling away at your opponent's stamina, almost inflicting a form of psychological warfare against them because they're constantly playing from a difficult position. They're constantly getting demoralized. Man, it really sucks to get stuck there. And what we're seeing is that even against good athletes, this strategy absolutely works.
You talk about psychological warfare, which is something that I kind of neglected for the first like 70-80% of my experience with jiu-jitsu. It was all about like, do the move, get the technique, get the result. What is the result? The guard pass, right? But now it's like Danaher is very, very meticulous and methodical the way he talks about things aside from technique and mechanics. He also talks about things like tactics, like, yeah, the psychological warfare. If your opponent fears you, then they will be conservative in their attacks. If you can use pressure over time and exhaust your partner, then your techniques will be that much more effective. And over time, you can wear them down. If you can prevent your partner from breathing, let's say in a mounted position, by just covering their face, you can create a lot of, poor reactions on their part and just make them struggle for the next breath. So I've taken a ton of these psychological weapons, if you will, that Danaher has spoken about lately and really added them to my game. And it's absolutely miserable to be on the receiving end of these tactics. And it plays a huge part. I think it's interesting. This camping style is perfect because previously I think most people would talk about nogi. The main thing I hear from people who make transitions to nogi is, oh, I don't have my grips and I can't slow anyone down. It's all about athleticism and it's so, you got to be so fast and it's so slippery and stuff. And it's like, I think that's actually becoming less and less true every day because you were seeing like on Who's Number One. I mean, let's be honest, it was fucking boring. And the reason why it was boring is because most of these matches, people are using this camp style passing and it's so effective that the bottom player can't really move. And, as effective as it is, it's really not very crowd pleasing at all. But I mean, if I watch Gordon, I'm a Gordon fanboy. Everyone knows that, right? Like, and I love him not because of his like personal opinions or anything, but just what he contributes to jiu-jitsu. And every time he fights, I learn something. And that's really why I love his style. And I can watch him, smash someone for 40 minutes and not let them move because I'm trying to watch every minute detail. And then I know at some point I'm going to get his instructional and he's going to talk about what he did because he talks exactly about what he did in his matches. So I learn a lot from watching guys like him, especially in the pressure-based passing realm, which was something that I was missing for many years. Leading up to black belt, I was, mostly a movement-based player, trying to do dynamic movements, passing, use athleticism. Then I turned, 30 and I realized like, hey, I'm getting more injuries. My stamina is not what it used to be. All these young guns are faster than me. Like I got to have another style. And then I watched Gordon and I'm like, how is this guy holding people down? And he never moves fast. Gordon never moves fast, but he is so good at taking away movement. And I said, maybe there's something to this. I'm going to start emulating this style. And then that's when I really started. I actually first learned this style studying a Danaher instructional called dynamic pins and half guard passing. And then that's essentially where I guess the Gordon Ryan half guard, camp style of jiu-jitsu came from. And really in Gordon Ryan's half guard passing instructional, he talks about, backtracking, camping the J point. So essentially he goes into this camping position on the J point where he's basically got hit. How can I describe this? Well, one thing that's very, very common in all of Gordon Ryan's pressure passes is he takes his head and he does what he calls crashing the far shoulder, which is essentially just describing his head position on the far shoulder. And once I started doing this, I started realizing like, putting my head here makes my guard passing so much more effective because my head is essentially so close to my partner that they can't push me away from them. But I find a big mistake that a lot of people do when they try and pass the guard is their head is up in the air. And so the bottom player has no problem reestablishing their frames with their arms, and then they can bring their knees back inside. But if you just take your head and push your head to that far shoulder, it's exhausting for the bottom person. So this camping position, the head's crashed the far shoulder. He's essentially up in a tripod position. And then if I was passing around to the left side, imagine passing on my partner's right, but I'm going to my left. Right hand would be on the inside hip. So your right elbow would be inside their leg, and then your left hand on their knee to take away any knee-elbow connection. And with this tripod position, with the two hands on the inside position dominating the legs and your head crashing the far shoulder, it's shocking how long you can just stay in this position. And he uses this position when he loses side control, which basically never happens in competition. But if he gets to side control and the guy creates a side guard by bringing their knee to their elbow, he pops into this camping position. So he backtracks into a camping position, and then from there, you can just run your partner's hips to the other side and regain side control. Or you can use it if you get to this position where you break free of the leg, you can kind of hold it. And if they recover like a half guard, like they manage to hook your leg again and you're in this position, he talks about how you can just like essentially just knee slice through the leg. But the coolest thing is he's not in a rush to pass. He just slides his knee down and goes back to camping. So when I saw him show this in his instructional, and we've seen him do it so many times in competition now, it's like, man, that's a totally different mindset. Why rush the pass and get greedy and lose everything when you know that if you fail, you can just backtrack to a checkpoint? And when you have this mindset, it takes the pressure off of the guard passer to complete the sequence. And so just having this mindset, I find is like, it really puts the guard passer in a relaxed state while the bottom person is feeling all of the pressure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, it's funny because I know that, man, since the dawn of time in jiu-jitsu, people have said things like position over submission and talked about the importance of, positional dominance and not being too greedy. But you're absolutely right here that trying to hold position and making sure that you maintain your advantage is a lot more important than trying to rack up short-term point gains, right? I mean, yeah, there's exceptions. If time is a factor and you really need those 3 points, then yes, absolutely, you might change tact a bit. But that situation aside, as I get older, especially, I am way less concerned about, getting the result, whether it be a pass or a submission. And I am way more concerned about maintaining whatever advantage I've got. I was talking to your instructor, Rob Bernacki, about this a while ago, and I was saying, man, the funny thing is at black belt now, I find I get a lot less submissions than when I was at blue belt. Part of it, of course, is because, when I was a blue belt, I was training mostly with other blue belts, and now I'm training mostly with brown and black belts. But also part of it is a change in mindset. I mean, I remember when I was a blue belt, I would shoot up dumb submissions from nowhere. I would attempt low percentage passes, and yeah, I would get them sometimes, but I would also lose the position much, much more frequently. Whereas now, especially, getting older, I don't move as fast as I used to. I'm, way more injury averse than I used to be when I was younger. If I get an advantage, I'm going to keep that advantage for as long as I can. And so there's a bit of mental calculus that has to happen. If I'm in that position where I'm maybe in kind of like someone's quarter guard and I feel like I might be able to get the pass, but I just don't, maybe I just don't have their shoulders planted the way that I want, I'm not going to take it unless I'm really certain that I'm going to complete the pass. Because yeah, like you said, I mean, I can sit there at no cost to myself and just make the other person suffer, drain their energy, hopefully make them panic and go into a reactive mode. That costs me nothing except for a bit of time. But again, assuming that I have time, that's a totally valid strategy. Whereas if I try to rush things, I mean, I might wind up being on the bottom. And against a bigger, stronger, more athletic, possibly more experienced opponent, I do not ever want that to happen.
Mm-hmm. And, it's interesting because we've seen this change in Gordon Ryan's game where before he used to just pull guard every time and just go for the legs. Now he's almost entirely a guard passer. I mean, we did see at the last ADCC, he did some matches. Of course, he pulled guard on, what's his name? Roosevelt Souza, and just like heel hooked him in a second. And
that was
he explained
freaky.
Later. It's just crazy, right?
Yeah. Like, if you didn't know jiu-jitsu, and you watched that, you would think this match has to be rigged because
Yeah.
Gordon he's moving so slowly. It barely looks like he's trying, but he still leg locks this guy in around 10 seconds. It is absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, he did pull guard quickly, but once he got there, he didn't even have to do the usual roll through. The guy just tapped right away, which is crazy because, you know, that must just show how good Gordon's breaking mechanics are. Or it could also, circling back to the idea of putting fear in your partner's heart, you know, maybe Roosevelt's just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm not going to get out of here. We see guys go against Gordon now, and he does what he wants, and they do what they all that they can do. They don't do what they want. It's like, even though we kind of, unfortunately, we didn't see the last match between Pena and Gordon. Gordon backed out because of the so-called diarrhea gate. But the match that they had before, where it was Pena versus Gordon, and Pena essentially just verbally tapped after 40 minutes. I mean, Pena was not interested in pulling guard in that match. And there's a very good reason why, and that's because he was terrified of Gordon's pressure. At least that's how I read it. Of course, you know, Gordon haters out there are like, oh, he wasn't terrified. He was going to beat Gordon. Like, you know, the reason Pena didn't pull on him is because he knows how good of a pressure passer Gordon is now. And he also knows that Gordon's not looking to just beat him. Gordon's looking to embarrass him, and he's looking to hold him in these positions for extended periods of time for his own delight. You know, Gordon does not rush to the result. Like, you know that when he fights Pena next, that he's not going to try and finish it quick. He's going to try and mount him, smother him, let him recover a little bit, and then he'll continue to pour it on while Pena's just absolutely getting exhausted. And it's a terrifying thought to have someone do that, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so not only is that why Pena refused to pull guard in that match and knew how dire it would be if he ended up on the bottom, but also why you saw him give up after 40 minutes. And I mean, yeah, Leandro Lo died that day, and that's a tragedy. And it's commendable that Pena even competed that day, for sure. But at the same time, it's like he knew Gordon was getting into these basically a chest-to-chest position, and then he just gave up. So he didn't want to give Gordon the satisfaction of wearing him out any further. He didn't want to continue fighting for multiple reasons, but a big reason, I think, is because he knew once Gordon gets chest to chest on you, there's no escape at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to be Gordon Ryan to apply that kind of strategy. Of course, if you are, then yes, you will go into these matches with an aura of mystique that can often kind of lead people to think that things are inevitable. Kind of reminds me of Anderson Silva back in the day, right? He looked completely unbeatable until he didn't. And then from that point on, he suddenly became completely beatable because the aura around him was gone. But even for mere mortals like the rest of us, right? Man, if you can stick someone in a heavy pressure situation where they can't move and it feels helpless, even if it's just like two hobbyists in the gym who have no medals to their name, man, you get stuck at the receiving end of that strategy, and it sucks, especially when you can start to instill a degree of panic in the other person. And you talked earlier about Smothers, and man, I am so happy to see Smothers coming back as a strategy. Yeah, again, I remember there was this big thought at some points that, well, you know, smothering isn't going to work against really good opponents. But man, I don't care how good an athlete you are. If you can't breathe, your body is going to respond in a certain way, right? And that's to panic.
Yeah, for anyone who's tried the smother, it's actually incredibly effective. I'm getting tons of smother taps. You know, you could call it unsportsmanlike or distasteful, no pun intended, to your training partners. But, you know, if you have a sweaty rash guard and you do that, I mean, you're essentially waterboarding them, and it's absolutely horrible. And if you have like a single chest wrap in the mount position, man, you can finish someone just with that. And sometimes you're there and you're like, I could just do a katagatame right now, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to crush your face and make you struggle for your next breath. And man, the sick part of it is I'm getting like a sick pleasure from doing it and just watching, like, essentially emulate Gordon and see when he gets these positions, he's not in a rush at all. He just doesn't let his opponent move. And let's say, you know, you have mount and your partner does a huge explosive bridge and then they manage to recover like a 3/4 mount. That's a camping position where Gordon would now, you know, let's say he loses the crossface and underhook or whatever, the katagatame, and his partner recovers his elbow positioning. he kind of just sits back now and crushes the hips. And then his opponent had to use a ton of energy to do that. He's absolutely exhausted and trying to get to a neutral position. But as we know, 3/4 mount is not a neutral position at all. And now Gordon has the ability, I'd say Gordon as if he's the only, but anyone who uses this strategy now has the ability to build off of this 3/4 mount. So you're resetting from a position of dominance, and just this idea of camping to these positions of dominance is absolutely game changing. And if I could, I'd like to discuss sort of how to get to these positions and sort of what are my main positions. Of course, there's many, but I kind of go through 2 routes when I'm passing. Let's say it's a no-gi situation. Number 1, my opponent is a very good ashigarami player, and I find that I can't split the legs and get into a half guard position. So if they force double inside position, generally I'll drop to my knees and I'll start looking for body lock positions. Once you get to the body lock, essentially you're in a camping position as it is. Then the goal becomes to either shelf or split their legs. And then from there, you're just moving into your half guard passing, and you're just doing half guard passing at that point. Another option would be your opponent accepts the half guard. And now from here, we got to beat the knee shield. And once you beat the knee shield, you're kind of just camping by crushing the hips, right? So you can chill down there, crush the hips, and find a way to make that cranial shift. At any point, if they recover the upper body position, you just backtrack into a half guard. You could also do this from a loose passing situation now that I think of it. So you could use a dynamic style pass like a leg drag or a toreando or what have you, some kind of a loose pass to set up a half guard. And this is one thing that Danaher talks a lot about in that instructional I talked about. And sometimes you'll see Gordon do this, where he uses some toreando style passing just to get to a position like maybe not a headquarters, but like a split squat, which is essentially a headquarters on the other side. And then from there, a very important thing at that point when you're in a split squat is just really create the dilemma between the upper and lower body. So what I mean by this is, again, this is all Gordon stuff. I did not come up with any of this stuff. I have to give credit where it's due. Basically, you threaten the dilemma between controlling your partner's head and shoulders and killing the hips. So you always have 2 things you can work on simultaneously. This dilemma-based game is nothing new. It's something that Gordon and Danaher talk about all the time. So let's say I go and I try and go to a cross-face position and control the partner's head. Naturally, anyone good is going to prevent that from happening by framing on your bicep as your arm comes across. And then from there, that opens up the ability to insert your knee into their hip. And instead of moving up towards the head, you can laterally move across the hips and crush them into a flattened half guard, fully addressing the knee shield, or you can move in sometimes into a 3/4 mount. So this style of dilemma where you're either going to go upper body or lower body is extremely exhausting for the person on bottom. And then to make this position work, I find one of the best things is, like I said, crashing the far shoulder with your head. So another concept Gordon and Danaher talk about, Gordon literally talks about this in every instructional he has. Doesn't matter if it's leg instructionals, doesn't matter if it's passing or guard retention or seated guard, it doesn't matter. He always talks about the importance of dominating the inside position. We've talked about this. I think we referred to this on the podcast previously as the inside channel. And getting your frames inside of your partner's frames is basically how you immobilize someone in no-gi. So as he comes in, he's fighting for the inside position. In order to get the inside position on your partner's upper body, you're going to have to force them to frame on you. So as your partner frames on you, usually because your head is crashing the far shoulder or you're driving your head into their chin, they are going to be forced to frame on you. And this will open up opportunities to pummel inside position, whether it's going to be underhooks or bicep ties that later lead into underhook positions. And another common problem I see with people trying to use this head position is they're very rigid. And when you're rigid as you're tripoding and trying to drive weight into your partner's chest or shoulder or head with your head, what tends to happen is you're easily off balanced. And if they frame on your shoulders, they can effectively manage the space. So what I started doing, and I know I'm doing the right thing because in Gordon's instructional, he talks a lot about relaxed shoulders. And I'm like, I actually started doing this a couple months ago before I saw that. So, I'm happy with myself. I must be doing the right things. I realized that if I relax my shoulders and I sort of blade my shoulders and roll my shoulders as my partners frame on my chest and on my shoulder line, that their frames kind of just push into nothing. And you're able to now pummel inside position on their extended arms, get close to chest, and kill the hips and so on. So if you're going to be using this head pinning style of passing, it's very important to keep relaxed shoulders so that as they frame into you, that you can just sort of roll with the punches and get closer and closer to your chest position.
Yeah, it's one of those funny things about trying to dominate from the top position and move forward with pressure. When you think about this, especially as a new person, you often think that's going to mean you're squeezing and you're tight and you're tense and you're rigid. But you're right. The more tense and rigid that you are, you're just acting as a strong base that your opponent can push off of. And that makes your entire body more pliable. Whereas if you're kind of loose and relaxed, then it's like them trying to push or manipulate a wet noodle, right? It's very, very hard for them to do it. Similar with even if you're playing a mount, if you're just simply too tense, you're trying to ride the person too tightly, it's a lot easier for them to do a big hip bump or something like that and get out of there. Whereas if you're playing that position more loosely, they just can't connect to you and base off of you to the same extent. So that's one of those counterintuitive things, which is that sometimes loosening up and being softer actually results in more pressure.
The analogy I like to use is I try to be like a waterbed. So when my partner pushes into me, it's like their hands they're still forced to extend their arms, but there's nothing there to push into. Another analogy is like, and I'm no striker, but like a boxer rolling his shoulders as the punches are coming in, kind of rolling the shoulders, deflecting the frames as it is, or the strikes. And then from there, looking to get back to the inside position and just always thinking about your head position and always thinking about fighting the inside position through the dilemma of either trying to kill the hips or control the head and shoulders. So either way you go, it's very, very effective to get chest to chest. And instead of really thinking about the guard pass being the end result, think about getting chest to chest as the end result. And then from there, begin a new goal, which is to complete the pass or mount your partner or whatever it is. Lately, what I've been thinking about is how can I convert this into a gi situation? Because a lot of these positions, like the body lock and certain positions in the gi, I find it difficult to hold and camp out in, although a lot of them do translate. I find you studying a guy like Tynan Dalpra, he hit this long step style of passing that he does. Essentially, if you hit a well-timed long step, even if you don't pass your partner's guard, you have a lot of opportunity to enter into follow-up attacks to complete the pass. Now, we don't really see Tynan do a lot of camping. He's very dynamic, and I don't know how the AOJ guys do this. He moves a lot like his professors. They basically, I think Guy was a little bit more of a pressure passer than, say, Hafa. Hafa was very much a, crab ride, berimbolo guy. But these guys, when they have a goal, like pass the guard or take the back, like they can just fucking do it somehow. It's crazy how sharp they are. So you don't see him camp in positions for very long periods of time. Another guy is Andy Murasaki. You'll see him use a lot of pressure-based passing. He gets to these positions in the gi where he holds his partner. So like some camp positions that I've had success with in the gi, the long step position, if you can get there and then force your partner to follow up either by locking the half guard or framing away on you, a lot of the time you can convert this into chest to chest half guard passing, or you can convert it into a smash pass. I think the smash pass is one of the best camping positions in the gi, because from here you can just crush your partner. And then if they do recover, you're just looking to get into some kind of a half guard position, I guess, chest to chest. And very important that you don't posture up and give your partner the ability to frame on your head and your shoulders, because that will just lead to them getting their knees inside. Another position I really like in the gi to camp in is the punch pass, which is super effective, super old school, where you essentially weave passes, some people say, where you basically punch your partner's bottom leg and grab the pants and then take that same long step grip on the collar. And from here, I mean, even just holding that grip, you can camp as you walk around your partner's J point and just hold that position for long periods of time. And then I find my mindset usually switches from let's pass the guard to let's observe our partner's reactions. Because as your partner reacts in these positions, if you can really monitor what they're doing, it'll give you a better idea of what position you should go to next, as opposed to how I first learned jiu-jitsu which was, okay, guys, today we're going to do this guard pass. you know, and thinking about it that way, in that sort of black and white style of thinking where, okay, here's the guard pass, do the guard pass, now go try and do the guard pass on someone good. A lot of the time for me, it was like an all or nothing. I either pass the guard or the guy resets, and it was like not the right mindset. But when you start to add pressure over time and the idea of camping in these checkpoint positions, it's not so much about the guard pass, but just getting to a position of advantage and holding, and then trying to break your partner down. And then as they react, you move into different camping positions until you get to your desired position, whether it's mount or whether it's side control or even north-south.
Yeah, yeah. One of my favorite things to do these days is to go for a stack pass, and rather than completing the pass, just holding the person. So I get double unders.
That's so mean.
Yeah, I know. I'm an asshole. So I basically just lift them up. I park them on their shoulders and their neck, and I just hold them upside down, basically for as long as I possibly can, which is handy because I have no cardio, so it allows me to stall out the round. But I
and then win by an advantage.
Yeah. I also find, though, that that's a great way to kind of mentally break people who are much more aggressive than me. I mean, you know me, right? I do jujitsu for play. I kind of come into the gym and I just want to kind of learn and have fun and get a workout in and take it easy. Whereas, I mean, I train with a lot of guys who are younger and more competitive and they want to scrap. But what I've found is, man, if I take one of those young, aggressive guys and I park them upside down in that stack pass and just hold them there for about a minute, it's like breaking a stallion. Like after that, like they've dropped their competitive mindset down to my level now because they're so demoralized from that they just don't go anymore. So it's a really beautiful way, just these kind of like pressure positions where you just hold someone in a bad position and just let not just their energy, but also their morale just dwindle until there's nothing left. It's such a beautiful strategy. And it's also a very, I mean, if you buy into the whole romantic idea of what jujitsu is supposed to be philosophically, like that's the beauty of jujitsu, right? You're not just beating a person, but you're doing it with just absolute minimal effort. You're not hurting them. You're not exposing yourself to risk. You're just making them suffer until they give up on their own. And to be able to do that without even using a submission is just awesome.
Yeah, I remember I did a tournament. I did the IBJJF Portland Open. I don't know. It was pre-COVID, like right before everything happened. And my first match, I drew this guy named Paulo Costa, who was at the time with Gracie Humeta, but I think since he has moved to Atos. But like this guy was like this Brazilian guy, and I was just like, everyone in the black belt adult division at lightweight is going to be tough. I knew that, but like, if you want to talk about like pressure-based game, he had the exact same strategy for every match. First of all, he completely fucked me up. I had no offense through the entire match. He basically set up a blitz, and then he went into a stack pass, and then he just held me there. I actually popped a rib during that match, and I was basically begging for him to pass me. And by the time he passed me, he went to side control, and his pinning was so strong. And he did this to everyone. He won gold that day. Then I watched other guys on the other mats, a guy that I know from Atos, who's a middleweight now, named Rolando Sanson, very, very good grappler as well. He was using the exact same strategy where he'd basically set up a blitz from the top as his partner is high legging, usually because he's blitzing around the J point. This would allow him to now enter a double unders position, and then he would just like hold his partner there for long periods of time. And I don't think there's any worse feeling than getting stacked in the gi and your partner has the cross collar grip and you're just done. It's basically like a checkpoint position. If you think about it, it's a 10-minute match. What would be the advantage to finishing that pass, right? Why not just hold that position? You know you're going to get the pass, but every second you hold on, the person on the bottom now starts to become a situation where the person is begging for mercy and just saying, please just pass. Like I'm giving you the pass. It's such a weak feeling. So again, these positions I think can be modified for the gi for sure. It's just a matter of getting to them. And of course, half guard passing I think is just as effective, if not more effective in the gi than no gi. So like I said earlier, for me, the end result isn't necessarily passing the guard, but rather just getting to a chest to chest position or to a camping position.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, one thing that always blows my mind about this pressure game is that when you think about pressure passing and this kind of camping game, often you kind of in your mind think of this like big, brutish, muscular, strong person playing this game. But there, as far as I can tell, is no requirement to be a big person to play this game. I mean, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, although, hey, post-pandemic, I'm a lot bigger than I used to be. But all the same, I mean, I know a lot of people who are much smaller than me, and they play this pressure camping game brutally. And that's one of the cool things about it, is it's an amazing strategy for people of all shapes and sizes, too.
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, the only issue I think about this passing style is it's just not very crowd pleasing because there isn't movement. And generally when there's jiu-jitsu that takes away movement, it tends to be less aesthetically pleasing, but man, it's super effective. So, and again, these things move in cycles, like people will start to emphasize defending these camping positions, and then people will have to find new ways of getting to these camping positions and holding them and whatnot. And you'll see loose passing opening up again and whatnot. So I think a really good match to see Gordon Ryan's loose passing. There's two that come to mind for me. One of them was the Philip Rowe match, which was like Philip Rowe is a UFC fighter. He's not like a notable grappling competitor, but we saw a lot of the high stepping style that Gordon has that basically leads into J-point camping and half guard passing. And then the other one was Roberto Jimenez, where he was just toreandoing this world-class grappler and making him look like an absolute white belt. So like these, Gordon Ryan, he has the loose passing as well. And Danaher talks about using the loose passing as a means to getting to tight passing, and then from there completing the pass, or just camping and holding your partner and then, retreating kind of back from that position. I just want to make an honorable mention of, just for some resources for people if they want to see some videos on this. There's a YouTube channel. Obviously, I think he's been on the show. Less Impressed, More Involved, I believe is the name of the channel.
That's him.
Yeah, he's breaking down a lot of these camp style positions and analyzing Gordon Ryan's passing. And I think he put out an instructional analyzing this passing style. And then there's also Joseph Chen. I know on his Instagram page, he was posting some good videos about just explaining these concepts in further detail. So those are some resources that I'd recommend people check out.
Yeah, shout out to both of those guys, actually. Jake Luigi from Less Impressed, More Involved. You were right. He actually was just on the show. What's crazy about that guy is he's a purple belt, but his ability to analyze and break down and aggregate information is amazing. I know we plugged it in the past, and I'll put a link in the show notes again so people can check it out, because he did just release his first instructional, and people would often say, hey, why would I want to buy an instructional from a purple belt, right? But honestly, I do recommend people give it a shot, because he's not creating information whole cloth from himself. What he's doing is he's kind of doing like a meta-analysis. You know how like when researchers, sometimes people do a new study, but sometimes what they'll do is they'll like take 30 existing studies and summarize them all together to make the information more consumable and to look for patterns. That's basically what he's doing, right? This guy watches like every major half guard passing instructional out there, and he's kind of aggregated the best and most important info. So, you could spend thousands of dollars on all of these instructionals and hundreds of hours studying them all. Or if you want just like a quick hit, you can buy his, and for less than $100, you can probably get the highlights from one of the better analysts in the industry. So yeah, that's just an amazing idea. And I would actually like to see more of that. I mean, I know that, honestly, Matt, I'd love to see you do more of that stuff, because the main problem that I know many people have now is there's so much instructional content out there that just consuming it becomes very difficult unless you're doing this professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love doing the analysis and the breakdowns like on technique and on the technique platform primarily. I think that's such a good platform. And I actually wish that Gordon would use it on his instructionals, because he analyzes his rolls at the end of the instructional. He does sparring footage and then he breaks it down. And it would really help if he could use like arrows and stuff like that and use those types of tools that technique has to offer. But yeah, I really think that like an instructional like that, what's his name?
Jake
Luigi, like that's a really cool idea for an instructional, is just like breaking down footage and kind of analyzing it. And I'm shocked this guy's a purple belt, because he's incredibly knowledgeable and very, very observant in the way that he studies and breaks down current jiu-jitsu style. Like I've learned a shitload watching that guy's YouTube channel. If you are obsessive about jiu-jitsu and you want to know what the best guys are doing currently, definitely check out Less Impressed, More Involved. It's an awesome channel. Tons of information. And the fact, like, to a ridiculous degree, like the way that he breaks down videos, I can't believe this guy's a purple belt. I wonder what his actual jiu-jitsu is like. Maybe imagine he just sucked, but he's like, he can just analyze and see things so well. But I imagine with the way that he sees jiu-jitsu and breaks it down, that he's probably quite good as well.
Well, it's a different skill set too, right? Like being a good analyst is a totally different skill set from being a good grappler or competitor. You know, when you're a competitor or a grappler, you're basically trying to consume information primarily for your own benefit. Whereas if your job is to basically report to other people, it's a lot like being a coach, right? It's a different skill set. And I think that there's a lot of room in the sport for people like that, for analysts. In most of the other more developed sports, you see this, right? If you go and you take a look at, any of the big sports out there, there are people who, they don't play professionally, but they are experts in analyzing, breaking down, data mining, that kind of stuff. Jiu-jitsu is a new sport, so we don't have a lot of people like that. Jake might be one of the first. So, I mean, as a hobbyist myself, right, I actually love stuff like that because, look, I am simply not going to spend the amount of time and money that I would need to watch all of these instructionals. Because just since I do this for fun, I have kind of like a hard cap on how much I can invest into jiu-jitsu. So someone who can kind of like summarize the best of that information for me is immeasurably valuable, even if they themselves are not the world's ace competitor. The fact that they're putting together that information, it's a super unique and valuable resource.
Agreed. And just speaking on that, we were discussing breaking down things and getting that information to people kind of in like a compact little package and summarizing it. I know there's been a recent beef with Gordon and Ryan and Nicky Rod, and Gordon's calling Nicky Rod Nicky Fraud and all this. It's so fun, like watching these guys basically be like Conor McGregor and whatnot. Love it or hate it, we're hanging on the guy's every word, right? But where I was going with this is Nicky Rod, if we could just compare the two instructionals and the way that they teach, I think they're both very, very good teachers. Obviously, I think Gordon's skill is It's light years ahead of Nicky Rod's, but Nicky Rod's style, combined with the fact that he's allegedly greasing, can make it very difficult to deal with his competitive style. As far as his instruction, when comparing the two, I find that Gordon's style it's like an autistic level of detail. Like it's almost so detailed that you're going to have to watch his instructionals over the course of months, and you're going to have to watch them again to get every detail, because he's so detail oriented. Whereas I find Nicky Rod's instructionals are essentially the Gordon Ryan Danaher system, but he has simplified it and kind of pre-digested it for you. It's usually a quarter or a half of the length of a Gordon Ryan instructional, but still gives you really, really good details that really work, and just a different way to learn and to teach it. So I know Gordon is shitting on Nicky Rod's instructionals. Oh, it's just a hyper processed version of what we do. He stole everything from us, and yeah, whatever. He's got his own beefs with Nicky, but I find that to circle it all back, having like a partially digested analysis of someone else's work. Not saying that's what Nicky's doing, but it kind of sounds like that. Sometimes that can be very, very helpful to learn like that. And just to see someone like less impressed, more involved, to see him break down all this match footage and have these key takeaways, I think he's on the money, and he's putting out some really awesome content. So, if you really like instructionals where it's like, no, I want to know every single detail, I'm a high level grappler and I want to know every single detail, Gordon Ryan's probably for you. If you are, mid level or even high level, and you just, you don't have a lot of time to watch tons of footage, but you want good bare bones meat and potatoes breakdown of a certain system, I think Nicky Rod is a really good person to check out, and definitely check out Less Impressed, More Involved.
Yep. Probably worth also clarifying, we're not getting paid for any of these plugs. This is not a sponsored ad read. This is just legitimately good content. Most people out there probably are already familiar with the stuff anyway. But yeah, if you're not checking out these resources, especially if you don't have a ton of time to study jiu-jitsu as you may want to, if you kind of have a time constraint, these summary resources are really awesome. So, hey, Matt, on that note, anything that you wanted to plug? I mean, there's been a lot going on. Of course, we should plug your online academy as well. But man, I don't think we've mentioned on the podcast yet that you are now an officially published author as well.
Yeah, I got a bunch of things going on in the background. I did a kid's book. It's called Zara Can Do Jiu-Jitsu. Zara is my daughter. The book is Actually, there's not a lot of kids jiu-jitsu books out there. There's a couple, but I find them all kind of silly or just lacking in plot in general. Although it is cool to introduce your kids to jiu-jitsu with a book like A is for Armbar, which is a cool book, but there's no storyline at all. There's also like the Shih Tzu that does jiu-jitsu.
I've got that one.
Yeah, it's like it's kind of a silly one with like a moral or whatever, but like still it doesn't really talk about what it's like to be a student of jiu-jitsu and to go to an academy and to train and whatnot. So this is a book that's about my daughter who does jiu-jitsu. She's going to be 6 this month, and you know, her daily training regimen, what it's like for her to go to the gym, the ups and downs of it. It's meant to be also an educational book. So even though I really like the illustrations, but it talks about moves. It talks about some ideas of how to do jiu-jitsu, what you can learn from jiu-jitsu. And of course, there's a glossary in the back. So it's kind of aimed towards young families and kids just to spread awareness for jiu-jitsu. And you should definitely check it out. If you got kids and you're thinking about putting your kids into an extracurricular activity, Zara can do jiu-jitsu. I'm very happy with it. And of course, yeah, I have the online academy. So the online academy, probably the best part of the online academy is that all of my lessons that I do every day in class, I put on the online academy so you can follow along with us. It's only $10 a month. And yeah, pretty happy with how that's going as well. So check it out.
And your production value is somehow better than BJJ Fanatics. I'm not really sure how that works, but I was kind of surprised by that.
I don't think so. I mean, BJ. One thing is, I'm kind of building the plane as it's in flight. It all started off with me asking my students, how can I improve, the environment here at the gym, and improve the program. And one of the suggestions was, hey, it would be great if there was a place where we could go to watch footage if we couldn't make it to class, or if we forget the lesson, and we want to refresh our memories with the lesson. If there was a platform that we could watch the video. So I said, hey, that's a great idea. And I was noticing you use Teachable. I believe you use Teachable for BJJ Mental Models, right?
I still kind of do. I switched. I mean, if anyone actually wants to know on the back end how this stuff is done, we did use Teachable, but we switched to a new platform called Kajabi. And the main reason why is because, unlike your stuff, almost everything we do is audio based, and Kajabi just has way better audio features. Like you can plug stuff into a podcast player. I mean, for a virtual academy, an online academy, you don't need something like that because it's so video oriented. But because people listen to BJJ Mental Models content primarily through a podcast player, it was a big deal to us to switch to that platform. So yeah, but we did used to use Teachable. It's one of the better options in the space as well.
Right. And I think you mentioned that some other grapplers were using Teachable to release instructional. So
yeah. Robert Deagle uses Teachable. Yoga for BJJ, I believe they use Teachable for some of their stuff. It's one of the bigger players in the space.
Yeah, so it's just a place that I can put content. I can put like written content and audio content and technique analysis content. There's videos. Like I said, every day I put lesson stuff on there. There's a referees course. There's a kids section where I show the criteria that my kids go through to get to the next ranks. There's content in there for gym owners and instructors. I've had it for about a year now, and it's growing pretty nicely. So definitely check out the On Guard Online Academy. You can just go to www.onguardbjj.com and you can check it out there. Great stuff.
Yep, amazing. And as I always do, I'll put links to all of the stuff in the show notes. I know how hard it is to catch and remember the stuff when people are just talking at you on a podcast. So Less Impressed, More Involved, Joseph Chen, the Zara Can Do Jiu-Jitsu book, and the Online Academy. I'll put those links in the show notes to just make it easy for people to find and follow. For those of you out there who have always been asking for a visual version of what we do on the podcast, probably the best way to do it is to check out Matt's Online Academy, because that is actually visual as opposed to what we do, which is pure audio. Of course, I'll also put a link to all of our stuff. I think everyone surely knows by now, but everything we make you can find on bjjmentalmodels.com. The vast majority of that is free. Over 200 episodes of timeless, evergreen jiu-jitsu back catalog content on the audio feed. I've also got our massive database of concepts there that are just a great resource to consult, as well as our really popular newsletter. It's all free, so I do recommend you sign it up. That's also how you can join our premium service. If you want to kind of take our approach and have more structured courseware style content with some of the best grapplers in the world, sign up for that. That's all on premium. We launched, I believe, at least 10 courses last year alone. And all of that is bundled into the subscription. If you're a premium subscriber, you get that all. It doesn't cost you anything extra. Anytime we launch a new instructional, you get it for free. On top of that, we've also got our amazing coaching service with legitimately some of the best grapplers in the world on there. Just in the last month, we onboarded Brianna St. Marie, Margot Ciccarelli, Rachel Ranshaw, Amanda Bruce as coaches. So if you want them to give you custom tailored feedback on your grappling, sign up for premium. And of course, we got our amazing community there as well. So please do consider that if you haven't already. BJJMentalModels.com for all of that stuff. And again, all of these links go in the show notes to just make it easier. But Matt, thanks a lot, man. Awesome chat. Great to have you back on here. I'm glad we were able to swing a time that actually worked.
Yeah, and also I do video breakdown for BJJ Mental Models. So some of you guys are sending me reviews. Keep the reviews coming. There's also one more thing. I just wanted to mention that I'm also going to be starting a show of my own. It's going to be called the Essential Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, and it's going to be much like just like our conversation here today, where we're discussing could be techniques or concepts. Look for that to come out in the next month. That's a big project that's coming up for me. Again, the name is going to be the Essential Jiu-Jitsu Podcast, and if you like my coaching style, check it out.
Yep, and we'll do a big announcement when that's all ready and live and good to go. Can't put a link in the show notes to that one because it's not live yet, but expect to hear more soon, and we'll have a big announcement. Anyway, as everyone can tell, there's a lot on the go. But man, Matt, thanks so much for coming by. Great chat. Love having you back on here, man.
Great chat. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, man. And of course, to everyone else out there, thanks to you as well. Always appreciate people hanging out with us here and chatting. And we'll talk to you soon. Take care.